I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
And this is When East
Meets West.
Well, Nikki, it's again been a long time and I have missed you.
I've missed you too. Well, everyone should know Pete and I have talked not on this podcast.
But not enough for me.
But not enough for me.
Still not enough.
Still not enough. Yeah.
Well, welcome back and to our listeners. We wanted just to, check in, say what's up. And then, I think we're going to take another hiatus and just to kind of, talk a little bit about what psychologists do and why we might need and benefit from a hiatus.
Yeah. And, I think when we first introduced this, initially we'd said, we're going to go down to every other week. And then Pete and I's schedules got in the way. We realized we had a conversation where we're like, this does not seem very workable right now. We talk a lot about workability on this podcast. Yes. And we also let you guys know that we really live what we preach, Yeah. And so here's an example of that is that, when something isn't working, you have to be willing to shift and to pivot. And so, we really love doing this podcast and we're definitely not ending it. So
we're not abandoning anything.
We're not abandoning anything.
Nope.
But we did realize we need to take an extended hiatus until we have space to have room for this because, it's just like, we don't want to keep trying to force a square peg into a round hole, which is the opposite of workable.
Opposite of workable, opposite of mindfulness. Well, and we also, I think what we'll do during this hiatus is also like figure out the best day and time. It's interesting. Like I'm even dealing with that. And I think one of the things we'll talk about today is some of our multiple roles that we have professionally. And so one of the roles I'm a part of is the Big East Sports Psychology Provider Group. And we were looking to find a day and time that worked to meet. And we had landed on Friday afternoon, and then every Friday afternoon, which was once a month, somebody, more than just one person, people just couldn't make it for whatever reason. So now we're like going back to the drawing board to find out which day and which time frame works best. So for our listeners, we used to, Nikki, I think I'm right in this, we often would record on a Friday.
Well, we would record on a Friday. That became our sort of extra. However, Pete and I, you and I try not to work on Fridays.
I don't like to work on a Friday.
I don't either. I don't see patients on Fridays. And
so that's why we went to Monday.
Yeah. And we had a scheduled time on Mondays that we would record.
Yeah.
However, we both got really busy. And I do think it's important, like what Pete's bringing up, to explain like how psychologists can have multiple roles. Of course, anybody in any kind of career can have multiple roles. But I think what's kind of interesting about being a psychologist is that, and one thing that I really like about this type of work is there are so many different kinds of jobs that we can do in our role as psychologists. Like you can, of course, limit it to one thing. Like there are psychologists that are just research psychologists or psychologists that are just therapists. Right. Most psychologists that I know do act in numerous roles, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So while that keeps things really interesting and, keeps things really interesting, it also ends up can oftentimes becoming, a bit of a liability when it is related to maintaining our energy levels. Right. Yes. And so, I think it's important to say, as I've said many times in this podcast, we can become rigidly attached to anything as humans, even things like variability, right? So, or flexibility. So as a psychologist, there's so much room to be flexible and do all kinds of things and have a lot of variability. However, if you are so attached to doing lots of different things, at some point, that's going to stop working. You're going to need to pause and sort of reassess.
Yeah. And that's what we're doing because it just got to that point. Because then so like, I'll just talk, so multiple roles. So, Professor Rutgers, I also oversee the behavioral health at Rutgers and Seton Hall and a couple other sports organizations. And so it's just been March Madness, which maybe there's a listener out there who's familiar with that. And so while, the teams I work directly with were out in the first round, one of the teams was the Cinderella story, which I actually thought would be a really cool episode because I think the Cinderella story, right? I don't want to.
You mean in general or
in general, especially related to basketball?
I do not know it in relation to
Wait,
basketball.
Really?
No, I'm not a basketball fan.
I know, but you're a sports fan. But that's why.
I like sports. I'm a crazy Dodger fan. I love
know
baseball.
that.
I'm a crazy Dodger fan, but and I like basketball, but I don't like follow it, and I don't follow college.
Well, I guess so. Then there's a good fact checking of assumptions right there. Because I did have the thought that like everyone knows the Cinderella story in March Madness, but I guess they don't. So
No.
for those listeners who don't, it's just that there's always like one team, like one university across the country out of the 64 that are selected that goes further than expected. Like they're
just like an underdog story.
It's a total underdog
sure.
story.
Yeah, sure.
You can get with that.
Yeah, sure, for sure.
Yeah.
I love an underdog story.
Well, it just so happens the underdog story this year was St. Peter's University out of Jersey City, New Jersey, which, as you know, Nikki, that's where you met. That's where I lived when we met.
Yes, that's right.
So I lived there for a long time, and I have strong affiliations with the university. In particular, the head coach. He and I went to school together. So we're cool like that. And so I've been cheering him on really his whole career, both as a player and now as a coach. So it was just cool to kind of be a part of that. So that's a lot of what has hijacked my schedule recently.
Sure.
That's one of the many roles.
And Pete, can you actually, and that's, by the way, very cool, very exciting, that's going on. But I think it might be helpful then to explain a little bit more about like what your roles are. Because you're like mentioning you're a professor, you run the behavioral program, you're a clinician, but I don't think that really captures like what you're doing day to day. Like maybe you can say a little bit more about it sounds I'm laughing because I'm thinking like it sounds like we're defending our decision to listeners. Like just so you guys know, we're really super busy. But
we need this hiatus.
We need this hiatus. But it's more, I do think it's, I think it's important that you brought up. It is just, I think, helpful to understand like what it looks like. I don't think a lot of people, I don't think a lot of people know sort of like what we do with our day,
Well, the thought that I keep having is, and I guess I remember learning this, is that like oftentimes clients think that they're sort of like the only client we have.
Yeah.
It's like a thing, right?
It's a thing. Or I think that we're more available. Like I think sometimes, like I have on my voicemail, for example, that I get back to people's messages within 24 to 48 business hours. I try to get back within 24. However, but it's because if I'm back to back with patients all day, it's like, if barring an emergency, I might not be able to call you back for a little bit.
That's right. Yeah. So I think, so the professor role means that I do like research, I do some grant writing, I do some like course scheduling, and, I teach and I advise students, graduate students. And so every day looks different, which is what I like about what I do. And so so yes, we're defending our decision for hiatus. No, I am not complaining, because I do love the majority of my days of work, I mostly love.
Yes. Well, because again, it's like, because variability, if that's something a person values, then that's mostly going to be workable. Mostly. And values also, if we're rigidly attached to a value, at some point that's going to become unworkable. So I'm similar to you in that I also love variability, and it's like, it's very interesting to me. It's very stimulating to be doing different things and be in different modes. Right. And there comes a time where it's like, then my attention is being pulled in time in too many directions. And I actually can't, I can't, I can't be effective. And if anything, it's like, at least for myself, I can, just speak personally here, that historically I've been somebody that I haven't always been skilled at listening to when I'm needing to take a pause on something. Yes. I can become rigidly attached to, variability or showing up for people. Yes. And so, like when Pete and I had this conversation, it's like, I just started to notice like the inklings of like, I think this isn't working. And in the past, I would have blown past it. Yeah. I would have just gone like, that's fine. Like, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to put this into our schedule. Right. And I share that with listeners for you to know, again, psychologists are humans too. We don't do things. Yeah, I'm a human,
because I'm going to say that it was probably hard for you to even say that to me. Because
it was. Yeah. Though I will say that this is where I was like, oh, good job, Nikki. You've evolved in this area, because I also I didn't feel afraid to talk to you about it. Yeah. And I also didn't feel guilty about it. Yeah. Yeah. Whereas in the past, we talked about this in our guilt episode, justified versus unjustified guilt. I would have felt unjustified guilt that even though my intuition, my wise mind saying, you need to slow down on this, I would have blown past it. And I didn't. I just was like, Yeah, I gotta listen
And
to
then,
myself here.
and that's why we're showing up for ourselves, because like we have to put our mask on first. And so in order for us to do our job well, we have to be healthy. And if we are blowing past those signals, we become unhealthy. And I think that's important. And so, so yeah, any day of the week, I could be in a different office. And so in any day of the week, I have an option of about 7 or 8 different offices. Again, not a complaint, but it certainly gets things a little confusing.
Yes.
Where I don't know where things are sometimes, because it could be in any one of 7 or 8 offices. But again, that's a privilege that I have. And it's something I like. And so on some days I could be seeing private practice clients, what might look like some, professionals, executives, professional athletes. On other days I could be seeing some of the student athletes. I could be working with teams. So I could be doing team workshops where I have, whatever, an entire roster that I'm responsible to have some kind of curriculum. And so that's where I've been feeling some of my energy being pulled, because I'm trying to be creatively engaging. Oh, so what do you think about the creative engagement, Nikki?
I like that phrasing quite a bit. Yeah, no, creative engagement is, well, I think it's also related to variability. So I'm thinking, there's there's a stimulating quality. It's the difference. And I think it is important to say, it's okay if you're a listener and you think, I don't like that. Like there are people that don't like variability. They actually like predict, they more value.
Go in at 9, leave at 4:30.
Go in at 5. Yeah. They like the predictability and more structure, and that's okay too. So I think it's important to say, it's not like what Pete and I are suggesting is that this is the best way to be a psychologist, or this is the best way to be a person. It's that this type of career has a lot of opportunities for variability and flexibility, though that's not required, right? And so, there, like I said, that's why I think a lot of psychologists I know do like it, because that's probably one thing they're drawn to about the field. In addition to helping people, it's like there's a lot of just options for doing different things, where there's other careers where, like there isn't as much room for that,
Yeah, exactly. So because we could do research, we could do teaching, we could do clinical applied work, we could do organizational systems work, we could work within schools. There's consulting. I mean, there's so much,
kinds of things,
all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, all kinds of things. And so, and I will say, Pete has actually a lot more variability than I do have a fair amount of variability, but you definitely, you wear more hats than I do.
Well, you also have more autonomy than I do.
That's true. That's true.
So if we're maybe speak about your day and why you have more autonomy or independence.
Yeah, well, because I'm primarily a clinician. That's my main role, is working as a therapist. So I run my own business, my own private practice. And then so then anything else that I do it's just whether I want to do it or not, basically. So, I'm affiliated with UCLA. I'm an assistant clinical professor there, which is, it's a very generous title they give us, which really means I'm a supervisor. I train a student a year in acceptance and commitment therapy. So I do that. I also sometimes, I just did a 10-week process teaching group, experiential learning group in ACT.
Which I blame for really interfering with our schedule. So
he does.
Students, you better really know what the gem you just got.
I was like, but I really love doing this. I've got to do it.
Well, they're so lucky to have you.
Oh, that's very sweet. That's very sweet. I mean this. I'm lucky to work with them, and some really amazing, psychologists in training coming into the field. But so I do that.
Cool.
And then
I get their number.
Yeah. I always tell them, I'm like, I would say, you think I'm joking, but I can't wait to refer to you all. So once you're licensed.
Well, I was thinking for myself, but all right.
Or for you. That too. So I do that. And then I love, it's related to supervision, but I love training is probably my most favorite thing. So I also do training for licensed clinicians. So I do consultation for licensed clinicians that sometimes it's like a one-time consultation. Sometimes it's ongoing when they want training in ACT or some kind of third wave CBT treatment. I do online trainings for people they're called continuing education credits. I do those. And I'm creating new courses. I do I also do consulting, not consultation, but I do some consulting for businesses. So, not to mention, I guess I had I have a psychotherapy suite that I rent out.
Right.
I'm
You're a landlord.
I'm a landlord.
Yep. Very entrepreneurial.
Yes, I'm very, very entrepreneurial. Yeah. So I like to have my hands in different things because I think that's interesting, and I like to think of different ways to connect to psychology, but also I'm interested in entrepreneurship. So like that as well. And the podcast is one of those things, when Pete and I talked about doing this, as we mentioned, really Pete saying he wanted to do it. And I was feeling very
reluctantly
reluctantly pulled along. But very glad that we chose to do it and we'll return to it. Part of that, of course, as I've shared, was because it felt very vulnerable to me. But the other reason was because my schedule is busy. And I think both Pete and I, especially given what we went through in our own training, really want to protect our own personal time. And so that's something that's very, very important to me. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I wasn't always as skilled at that. And so, it's something, and this is where the mindfulness part comes in, right? Like I'm very aware and paying attention to, am I coming up on my edge, or am I using more gas in my tank than I want to be using?
Yeah.
So,
you got to keep some in the reserves.
Yeah. And because clinical work is, I see a lot of patients.
Yeah. And for our listeners, I mean, it requires a lot of energy, that clinical work, which is a lot of why I don't do a ton of it, in all honesty. But I know you always love the mindfulness contextual behaviorism. And I think that'll also be important because contextually, we started this during the pandemic, which there was much more home time.
Yes.
And as scary as it was and how unknown it was, how brave of us to start it during that, which is part of our tagline of be present, be brave, because, there was so much uncertainty. But then now, as the world returns, or as we sort of returning,
very active, a very active way of saying
I love it.
Very ing.
As it's returning,
returning.
we find ourselves with less time in our schedules because we're out and about. We are trying to refuel up, because the pandemic certainly took a lot of our gas out of the tank as well.
Yes.
And so this is another sort of gesture towards that.
Yeah. And I think, this is, I hope, can serve as a model just in general for people. But I think, one thing we have to be really mindful of as psychologists, what Pete's talking about is, if we want to, our job is about showing up for other people and, holding space for other people that are suffering and helping them. And so, like what Pete mentioned earlier, we need to put our mask on first. If you didn't catch that, he's referring to the mask on an airplane, right? Like an oxygen mask, right? Like that's what they say on the airplane. Like you need to put your oxygen mask on first before helping somebody, like a child or someone who needs assistance next. And that's really true for all of us. Like that's not just relevant to being a psychologist, right? It's relevant to everybody. And I think a lot about, and I train students this way too, that if you want to have a long career and it's values-based for you to contribute and help other people, then you got to be around to be able to do that. Like if you burn out, you're actually not going to be able to live your values in that way. So that does mean slowing down, setting boundaries, saying no to certain things, taking a break from certain things. And that's what we're doing here. And so, I do think it's important to be clear. We are not canceling the podcast. Both Pete and I really enjoy doing this and sharing this information with you all. But I don't know, my guess would be maybe we'll come back in the summer. That's kind of what I'm thinking, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we want to really have this live,
we are. I'm thinking out loud. I don't know. I'm going for it. I'm thinking out loud.
I love your spontaneity, Nikki. I'm thinking similarly. I think what we wanted to do is at least get out there to be like, hey, folks, we're around, we're here still. I'm actually going to suggest that we probably schedule something like next month, because it'll be so that we could so that we have some in the bank, and because scheduling is so tough, because then we're also in the summer going to want to be doing more self-care, because as psychologists, especially those in academia, they usually disappear in the summer. I often, there's, completing dissertations or other things in
Sure.
life.
Yeah. You get a little space in that area.
So we're
Not,
always
not necessarily in the clinical work area. I
not
feel like
necessarily the clinical work,
not the clinical work,
but clinically, August is always known to be like a little desert land.
Well, on the East Coast.
On the East Coast, yeah.
That's a cultural context thing. Well, because just for, a fun historical fact for listeners, because New York, it's New York. Well, I don't know actually in other East Coast places, but it's New York because it was that all the psychoanalysts would like go away for the month of August. Yeah. That was like a thing. And so, but here it's like people kind of go like it's staggered. It's not like August is no. It's not like, or in the summer even, it's not like a ghost town in August.
Right. Well, and I guess that's because then we're just trying to get the weather or
that
might just be our work ethic too. Like there's like a varying probably cultural contextual aspects to this, but I'm glad that we put this out there. We'll talk about that more, but just for listeners to know, this is see you later, not goodbye. And, thanks for checking in, and we'll see you guys soon. So check out, make sure to like us, follow us on, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. So this way, when we do publish our next episode, you'll be made aware. See you soon.
This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Pete Economo.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin. Be present, be brave.
This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes only.